sometimes you might have just had this exhausting day and your battery is drained and you need some space. So know that that can be happening for your child, where you're seeing them interact with people and then needing that space, that it may not be that they don't want to interact with people. It's just that they need some scaffolding or some breaks added in there, which is often why schools need to add in breaks for their children as well, so that they can recharge their batteries and it doesn't all stack up, that everything's so overwhelming, because it's not always easy. Ever snapped at your child and thought, why did I do that? That is not the parent I want to be. Or you watched your children lose it over something seemingly small and wondered, what is actually going on here? Turns out behaviour is never random. There's always something happening beneath it, and it always makes sense. I'm Jackie Hall, and this is Beneath Behaviour. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Beneath Behaviour podcast, where we're always looking to understand what's going on underneath somebody's behaviour or how they're feeling. Now, when we look at this through a parenting lens, we're trying to look at our children through the eyes of curiosity. And over the last 4 years, I've been working more specifically with the autism community. We've put nearly 4,000, I think it's over 4,000 families through our autism program. And we've spoken with over 20,000 autistic families in our free webinars that we run. And over that time and before that, I'd done a lot of clinical training on autism to understand what's going on in brain development and trying to understand behavior and trying to learn techniques that would help parents to be able to support their child in the best way possible. And I've learned a lot over especially the last 4 years, but I can tell you that the most of what I've learned has actually come from the families, the lived experiences of you guys who are listening, who have autistic children. And I wanted to come from that place because I want to talk about autism today, but I never want to come from a place of being an expert in your child. Now, I listen to, I'm a big fan of Love on the Spectrum, and I'm really excited that in our upcoming episode, I actually get to speak to Tanner's mum, Nikki, about her experiences with raising Tanner, who, if you haven't seen Love on the Spectrum, Tanner is just the most beautiful soul who feels like his role is to bring joy to the world. And whenever you listen to Tanner speak, you just break out into a smile and just feel that joy that he is spreading. And she has her own podcast, and with Connor's mum as well, another gentleman from the show. And one of the things I heard her say is that we are not experts on autism. That she said, I'm not an expert on autism, I'm an expert on Tanner. And so I wanted to come from that place today when I'm speaking with autism, that there is no expert, there is no professional that's ever going to be an expert on your child. You are the expert on your child. And over the years, you're going to find a lot of information from experts, a lot of, perspectives, a lot of approaches that they're going to use, a lot of theories that they have about your child that you're going to have to take in and discern whether that's right for your child or not right for your child, and be continually doing that and advocating for your child to get people to give you that professional support that you're looking for as well. So it's definitely no easy trip for parents of autistic children from that perspective. And so when I'm talking to anyone about autism, I'm never trying to speak down to parents. I'm a collaborative with you in getting curious about what's going on for your child. Now, if you've been following my podcast, you know that we're continually asking the question, what must I be thinking to be feeling this way, whatever the way that you're feeling is? What must I be thinking to be feeling this way or behaving this way? And when we're jumping into the world of our child, we're doing the same thing. What must my child be thinking to be feeling the way that they are, to be behaving the way that they are? So when we're looking at any child, we want to be looking through that curious lens and trying to understand how they're perceiving the world and how they're experiencing what they're experiencing to be responding however it is that they're responding. So one of the other things that I've been discussing, and I think it was episode 9, I introduced my super framework, which is a framework that I use in my autism course, but it's something that all parents, I feel, need to be using when we're looking at our child and understanding our child and supporting our child, just in life in general. And so the super is an acronym for self-awareness, understanding, prepare, plan, teach, environment, culture, and relationships. And the idea is that whenever we are thinking about how we can support our child, we're looking from all of those different perspectives. From the self-awareness, we're looking at, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? How am I responding? What am I doing that's working? What am I doing that's not working? And really having this kind of ownership and this awareness of how I'm contributing in productive ways and unproductive ways so I can change it to my child's behavior or to what's going on for my child or towards the goal that I'm wanting to help them work on. The you is understanding, where we jump out of the world of you and jump into the world of your child to really make sense of what's going on for them from their perspective, not from the perspective of what you think should be going on for them, but what is actually going on for them to be experiencing life the way that they do. The P is then from that place of self-awareness and understanding, you're then able to better start creating specific goals for your child so that you can then prepare them, plan for how you're going to get to those goals, teach them whatever it is that they're needing to learn for them to progress through life and thrive in life. The E comes from the environment and the culture of your family environment. So when we're typically looking at things, let's look at it from an autism perspective, and we'll talk about this in a minute. Very often we're taught, particularly through the eyes of the medical model, to look to our child as what we need to change or what we need to fix in our child in order to, overcome whatever barrier that they're experiencing. However, the environment and culture side of things is looking outside of the child and going, are there things going on in the child's environment? Are there things going on in the culture of the family, the messaging of the family environment, or even the school environment or whatever environment they're associated with, that could also be contributing to this? Are there things that we can change in the external world of the child and not just be looking for the internal world of the child to be supporting them to learn and grow? We're looking at how we can help make changes outside of them that can also support them to learn and grow and thrive in life. And then the last one is the relationships, which is the key part of all of this, that the child has relationships and rapport with caregivers that are able to connect with your child and help them to be able to communicate in whatever way that is, help to understand them, have fun with them, and help them to feel this sense of joy and love and feel loved and feel liked and feel respected, and that you have this kind of two-way street going on in terms of like a quality relationship and having them part of those quality relationships. So we're looking at all of those 5 different aspects in order to support any child. But in the autism perspective specifically, in today's episode, what I want to really do is focus on the S and the U, the self-awareness and the understanding. And we'll elaborate on this in future episodes, but this is kind of the first part of it, is to look at the self-awareness element. What's going on for you? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? How are you responding to your child? How are you approaching your child? And remember, we're not just looking at, things that you can be becoming aware of and changing within yourself. It's also looking at what things are working for you that you may not be looking at. And if you've been following my podcast, you'll see that mindset is a massive part of what I'm trying to achieve in this Beneath Behaviour. And what I'm always trying to achieve in all my programs is getting a sense of understanding what the parent is thinking, what's going on for them, because we can get stuck in these belief systems. So let's start with the self-awareness element and go, okay, and this comes from working with so many parents and understanding what's going on in their mindsets, and even the parents who are thriving in life, understanding what's going on in their mindsets as well. And so it's important that you look at your own narrative about your child through the lens of curiosity and go, what is that narrative that I'm speaking to myself on a regular basis about my child? And I'll give you a few examples, and these examples aren't any kind of judgment whatsoever. As you may be aware, if you've been following my program, we think through these stressful thinking lenses. If you don't know what that is, I won't go into them again. People are going to get sick of me going over them again. Essentially, wrong path, missing out, could have, should have, worth less is what it is. So we have these kind of viewpoints that we're often looking at when we're feeling any kind of stress. And so we want to be aware of those stories that we're telling ourselves, those narratives that are playing out. And those narratives can be about things that I expected to go to plan. This is that right versus wrong, that first lens, that I have an expectation that life is supposed to go a certain way. And when it's not going a certain way, I get a judgment about that. I think that life is going wrong, or I think my child's life is going wrong. And it makes me feel like I'm missing out or they're missing out. And then I think that they shouldn't be. I should be doing something different. I should do more, be more, have more, learn more, control more to get my child's life right and to prevent their lives from going wrong. And so from speaking to so many parents, I can recall common narratives that play out in a parent's mind that can be influencing how you're responding to your child. And this is why when parents very often say to me, should I tell my child that they are autistic? And my first question is always, how do you feel about autism? What's your narrative about autism? Because I'll never tell you whether you should or shouldn't tell your child, because it's a personal choice and that's a parental choice that you get to make. And everybody's going to have differing opinions on that. It's never my job to tell you what to do. It's my job to ask questions for you to think about different perspectives and what you want to do. And so one of the first things I'm asking is, what do you think about autism? Because that's going to influence whether you say something, and if you do decide to say something, how you're going to present that information. A lot of the time, when a parent is given an autism diagnosis, or the child is given an autism diagnosis, they're given a lot of symptoms, a lot of criteria that makes them meet the autism spectrum. And they're told a lot about the deficits that their child has. And the medical model calls them deficits because they're constantly comparing to a neurotypical child. So they're talking about the deficits as being, executive functioning difficulties and social difficulties and sensory processing difficulties. And there's often a very kind of heavy feeling that goes into giving a parent a diagnosis. And I don't obviously know personally how that's delivered, but I can see how that's received by parents. And very often there's this kind of dread that goes into that a parent often feels, not always, but often, where they fear for their child's life. They can very easily go into that right versus wrong path, feeling like the diagnosis means their child's on the wrong path, their child's going to miss out on loads of experiences, there's really not much you can do, or they're going to have this entire life full of all of these support needs, and that their life is in some way worth less. This is the messaging, or this is a lot of the times how parents are receiving the information on what that diagnosis means. And so it's important to be aware of how you have received that information and how we can potentially be looking at your child's diagnosis differently. Because when we look at it from a neuroaffirming perspective, and a lot of people understand or have heard that term neuroaffirming, we want to be looking at the child very differently to the medical model. Neuroaffirming basically means that we are affirming their unique neurology, that we're recognizing that everybody has a different neurotype, and this autism is a different neurotype. It's a difference in thinking. It's a difference in experiencing the world. And it's looking at it not from a deficit point of view, but a strengths point of view. So if we were to help any child to work on their maths, for example, we wouldn't start out helping that child by telling them all the things that they can't do. We would look at that child and we would go, okay, there are some things that you can do, and there are some things that you are challenged by. And so we have to somehow understand why you feel challenged by those things and scaffold you to be able to learn and grow and be able to do those things that you're wanting to do in the area of maths. And when we're trying to support an autistic child, it's kind of like the same analogy, because we're trying to understand what the child is thinking, what they're feeling, where they're at in their brain development, what we can do to help support them to reach their goals and to thrive at life and to keep advancing through life. And like I said, at the moment in this episode, we're only looking at the S and the U, the self-awareness, and we're looking at the understanding. But we've got prepare, plan, teach, environment and culture. So we're not always helping the child to be able to do that through teaching them, helping them through their environment as well, and relationships. But when we look at this self-awareness side of things first, we first have to recognize, how am I viewing my child? Am I looking at my child through the lens of deficits, or am I looking at my child through the lens of, what they can't do yet, understanding why it makes sense that they can't do what they're wanting to do or what you're trying to help them with first, and how we can bridge that gap between where they are and where we want them to be, or where they want to be themselves. So we're trying to look at our narrative, understanding that whether we have that deficit mind of thinking. And there's a balance too, because getting a diagnosis can be helpful because it helps you understand some of the barriers that may exist for your child, some of the challenges that they may experience in their life. And it helps you to kind of make sense of some of the things that are going on for them. So, for example, executive functioning, if you're telling your child 20 times to do something, but you walk in there and they're not doing it, maybe they're not processing that information the way that that they need to hear it. Like maybe you're not saying it in a certain way. And this is where that self-awareness comes in, where you're looking at, how am I saying things? Am I saying things in a way that my child can receive? Am I breaking it down? Am I loading up too much of what I'm saying on top of one another? So I'm saying, brush your teeth, put your shoes on, brush your hair. I'm layering on all of these things, and they just can't process all of that information, that maybe I need to pull it back to what they can do and then gently scaffold it to help them to grow on what they can do. So self-awareness is about looking at what your belief systems are around your child, and we can look at that from the perspective of the beliefs you might have about life in general, that sometimes we can get attached to an idea of how a right life is supposed to go. And it can be really difficult for sometimes a parent to let go of that ideal and think that there's other ways that life can be fulfilling. There's other ways that life can be still be different, but still be valuable. And so parenting in general tends to change who we are physically, mentally, emotionally, morally, and ethically. And I've seen over the years of working with autistic families that a lot of parents are going through a massive reconstruction of their belief systems. They're having to let go of a lot of what they typically thought was a normal life or a good life, and recognize that there are other ways to have good lives, because we've been indoctrinated by a lot of media and society that there is one right life, and that's a neurotypical one. And what I love about the autistic community is they're really changing the status quo. They're helping us to recognize that there are several ways that we can be experiencing life. And that's why I love Love on the Spectrum. And that's why I think so many people are loving Love on the Spectrum, is because so many people want to be like, have the attitudes of some of these autistic individuals on Love on the Spectrum, because they don't get as hung up on a lot of the things that we get hung up on. They're not processing life the same way that a neurotypical will. And that can be a good thing. And that there's a balance between recognizing that the way an autistic person thinks can provide some barriers. And a lot of those barriers are because they live in this, uncompromising, inflexible, neurotypical world. And that presents a lot of barriers because a lot of the neurotypical world doesn't understand the autistic world, doesn't understand their needs, doesn't understand their social communication, doesn't understand that they're not processing things, in a typical way. They're processing things in a different way. And the brain in general doesn't necessarily like new. It doesn't like change and often shies away or goes into resistance for change. So when we see something different, it takes a little while for us as individuals, but also as a society, to change and adapt our ways into being more flexible with our set ideas. So not only is a parent needing to look at their own belief systems and where they can sometimes get stuck in their beliefs about right versus wrong, but also society is needing to do that as well and become more flexible and really jump into the world of understanding the autistic child. So think about the first step in this super framework when it comes to, autistic families is looking at what must I be thinking about this? So whenever my child is experiencing any kind of behavior, what am I thinking about this? Am I going into this is wrong behavior? They shouldn't be doing this. They're defying me. Do you go into what that behavior means about you and your life? That sometimes we can, and I've talked about this, this isn't just for, autistic parents, this is all parents, that we can do what we call stack until we crack, where we're looking through those four lenses and looking at how things are going wrong. And then we look for other things that have gone wrong and we draw conclusions about that and say, well, I'm missing out on my right life and I'm missing out on my ideal, situations or experiences. And there can be a real grieving process that happens for parents who are, having to change how they thought life was going to unfold. And that takes time. And that's why none of those four lenses are ever any judgment. It's just an awareness of how I'm thinking about things. So it can be from the perspective of looking at your child's life. It can be from the perspective of looking at your own life and the narratives that get run about your life and your child's life. There can be narratives around, schooling and having to adapt to what the right education is for your child. There are so many things that kind of force a parent to kind of look at how they're viewing life. And even in my last episode where I spoke to Sarah, who's raising four neurodivergent teenagers, said, we're not like any other family. It doesn't make sense to try and parent like other families because we're not like them. And sometimes, accepting that reality is one of the hardest things. So I think in my previous episodes, I've gone into quite a lot about the self-awareness element from a narrative point of view. From a day-to-day point of view, the self-awareness is really just looking at what am I bringing to this challenge that we're having. If we're facing some sort of challenge, how am I approaching it? What's my narrative about it? Am I in conflict with reality? Am I fighting with the reality that we're in this challenge right now, that we're going through something? Am I thinking that it shouldn't be happening? Am I thinking that it's all going wrong? It's never working for me? Because all of that's going to influence how you respond to your child. And so when we're looking to parent from a neuro-affirming perspective, and I think that all parents need to be looking from a neuro-affirming perspective, we are, as humans, look at other people and we are aware that we all have different body shapes. We all have different likes and dislikes. We all have different ways of communicating, of socializing. Some of us are introverts. Some of us are extroverts. Some of us love certain foods. Some of us hate other foods that other people love. So I think it's not that far a stretch to realize that we all have different neurology as well. And we don't all have to communicate and respond to life the way that we've been taught is typical and normal. There is no normal anymore. There is lots of diverse ways that we can experience life, and that is becoming more and more common. And so this is what we're doing when we're being neuroaffirming, is we're just jumping into the world of that autistic person and going, let me get to know you. Let me understand how you're thinking, how you're feeling, how you're experiencing the world. Let me understand why things are tough for you and how I can support you, either in terms of helping you to learn what you want to learn in order to get where you want to go, or how do I help to advocate for the environment to support you to learn and grow and do the things that you're wanting to do in your life. So we're looking at that from that neuro-affirming perspective, where we're bringing into conversation differences in all people, differences in thinking. And this is part of that environment and culture, is making your family having these conversations, whether you decide to tell your child that they're autistic or not, having conversations about differences, having conversations about how some people are great at some things and some people are challenged by things. Some people get upset by certain things and some people don't. You know, that there is no right or wrong or good or bad. It's just diversity. Everybody is diverse. And so we're looking at challenges as opportunities to learn and grow. And so now what I'm doing is bringing in those upgrades that I taught in episode 4 or 5. It's called Parenting Through the Mud, if you want to look for it. So it's looking at those upgrades and recognizing that your child is going through highs and lows like everybody else. And it might be that right now they're going through some really, really challenging stuff, but it's never forever. And there's always some great things that are going on, or some things that are in the seed stage that are growing right now. And I think, if anything, that show Love on the Spectrum really shows and highlights. And I think that's why a lot of autistic families are very inspired by the show, because they're seeing these adult autistic people who are functioning well in society, that are happy, that have got great families, great friends. You know, they still have their challenges, you know, but it's recognizing that sometimes they came from, you know, they weren't speaking, they were, you know, having meltdowns, they were tearing things apart in the household, they were, you know, had sensory differences that were very challenging at the time, but they're still having a great life. And so I think we're needing to, again, coming back to that self-awareness, you know, being very aware of this kind of absolute thinking that we can get stuck in when things are challenging or things aren't going to plan, where we feel like it's always going to be wrong. So be very careful of that. It's never going to change. It's always going to be that way. And thinking that what you're experiencing now is your future. So be very mindful of that narrative. So we're being neuroaffirming. We're helping the child to see their strengths, see their differences, see their challenges as opportunities that we can just work around or learn from or grow from, or see it as an opportunity to advocate, to make change for other people. We want to see that upgrade, hidden good and the bad, opportunity, learning what we can be grateful for. And we want to bring that into conversation in the family home, so it just becomes the narrative of the home. Whenever we get stuck doing something, we think about, why are we getting stuck? What can we do about it? Is there something that we can do about it? And if we can't, then we accept that reality that right now we don't know. We don't know how to get around this. We're still working through it. So working on your own narrative and that self-awareness of changing how you think about the challenges that you face is going to make a massive difference to how you respond to your child when they're going through something difficult. So once we get this kind of self-awareness, and it's an ongoing thing. So you see that I've kept trying to move to the understanding part where we jump into the world of your child. But every time I start to do that, I'm bringing in that self-awareness side of things. So you're constantly going to be looking at, you know, your own thoughts and your own narrative and what you're bringing to the table whenever you're deciding what you're going to do to help support your child. So jumping into the understanding side of things, we have to kind of get a sense of what's going on in your child's brain. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? Why does their behavior make sense? So we're really looking at this from a curious perspective. And if there's one thing I've learned, and we hear this all the time, that it is a spectrum, and it is, because, you know, even when you come across any different autistic person or family, they all say something different. There is no one child that's alike. And that makes sense, because there's no one person on the planet that is alive. So when you're hearing about autism through that medical model, you want to take it with like as a general understanding of a typical neurodivergent brain. So a and I don't even mean typical as in like this is what your child is going to experience. I just mean they've taken a whole lot of experience and they've put it on a spectrum and they've gone, this is what your child may experience. So it's more about an awareness of information that can help you to understand your child and work with them better. So for starters, we want to look at the executive functioning side of things. So the executive functioning part of the brain is responsible for planning and organizing, prioritizing, emotional regulation. And so when you're seeing your child, when you've asked them 20 times to do something and they're not doing it, it requires a lot of planning and processing of information and prioritizing information that isn't necessarily a strength for your child. So we have to be aware, like even from a schooling perspective, that when your child is being told information, the different parts of the brain are having to work together to understand what are the words that are coming out of the teacher's mouth. What's the tone of voice that they're using? What's their body language? So things that you might take for granted, that somebody says something, you instantly collaborate all of that information together to know what they're saying based on wording and tone and body language and past reference points of experiencing things before and knowing in a split second what that actually means and what you've got to do about it. But you think of the amount of processing that needs to go into just understanding for starters, and then needing to recall what do I do about it and how do I then organize and plan the execution of what I've got to do in response to that person's request. And that takes an enormous amount of work in the brain that isn't always firing as quickly as other brains. So it's being aware of whether your child may just need a little bit more time to process things, and that maybe you could communicate that in a slightly different way. And so this is why often in autism, visuals are often easier for a child to understand something because they can get a picture of it straight away and they're not having to process so many words. You know, that's why social stories is often a great tool. But we have to, when it comes to social stories, really make sure that we're giving them the social stories that is responding to their actual need. So if you're seeing a child that's, acting out, like or pushing another child, for example, you're not just going to jump in to give them a social story about why they shouldn't hurt people or why they shouldn't push people or why they should keep cans to themselves. Before you even think about giving a social story or giving any kind of strategy to help that child, you've got to understand why that behavior makes sense. What was going on in their brain in that moment? What were they thinking? What were they feeling? How did their brain process that information in that particular moment? And sometimes that might take time because you might have to diarize their behavior over days or weeks or months, or you might need to work with the teachers or work with other caregivers that can give you information that you can put together like clues to make sense of that behavior. So again, coming back to that self-awareness, it's looking at, how are you perceiving it? Do you feel like you should already know the answer right now? Are you feeling the pressure that you need to fix your child, which is often coming from that medical model going, we need to make them more neurotypical. They need to be where the neurotypicals say they should be at in their development. And if they're not, then it's somehow your fault and you need to do something about it. And so there's all this pressure to be somewhere already that your child just may not be at that place, and they may not get to that place, or they might get to that place. And it's just being able to be in this moment and go, okay, why did that behavior make sense? What must they have been thinking? What must they have been feeling to make sense of that behavior? And then we'll know what we need to do about it. Then we can start to set a goal that says, okay, well, they might have misread that situation, so maybe I need to help them to read that situation better for next time. and give them a social story about that, which would be so much more productive than giving them a social story about keeping their hands to themselves, because that may not have been the problem. And a lot of the time with any kids who are pushing someone or hurting someone else, it's never because they don't know not to keep their hands to themselves. A lot of the time there's something else going on for them that we're needing to understand. So even if a child is doing something deliberately, we still need to make sense of that behavior, whether it's deliberate or not deliberate, because there's some reason why they prioritize that behavior to either get what they're wanting or avoiding what they didn't. And yeah, we need to teach them the morality side of things, but we also need to help them and support them to work through why they chose that behavior in the first place. Because rarely is it just straightforward as, they did the wrong thing, because even though they knew that it was the wrong thing, they did it anyway. It can be that, but there's always something else going on. So trying to understand. So executive functioning is one side of things, looking at how they're processing information, looking at how they're planning and prioritizing and organizing things, and whether they need some help to break that down, using visuals to help that break that down, or using, texting. Sometimes even a teenager can be a way, I wouldn't say a better way, because it doesn't work for all people. So everything that I'm saying here as a strategy, you can take it as a grain of salt. And it's probably the one thing I would say that you should do. I never say what you should do, but that's one thing you should do is just listen to what people have got to say, or not. If they're not credible or you don't want to listen to them, you don't have to do that either. But if you're taking that information and go, does this work for us? Because just like Sarah said last week, when she's raising 4 neurodivergent teenagers, she had a lot of self-doubt, and she was often trying to do more and thinking it was her fault if things weren't going to plan. But really, she started to realize that they just needed to do things their way. She just needed to accept the reality that they were all very different. The whole family were different, and she just needed to embrace that and started to work with that. So if you haven't seen that episode, it's really inspiring. I suggest you go back to this last episode. Where are we up to now? I think we're up to 11. So she must be episode 10 then. So go back and have a look at how she's had to make that transition into, being more flexible within her family, and sometimes letting go of some real social constructs in order to be able to support her children's mental health, which I agree, but she says is the most important thing for them to get that quality sense of self, that sense of identity of who they are, and also, like she said, who they aren't. And sometimes these social constructs that we have right now are not supportive of creating a really high, healthy self-esteem in a child, because a lot of well-meaning professionals are still trying to make your child neurotypical. And we're wanting them to recognize their uniqueness and their strengths. So again, I've come back to that self-awareness thing, that neuroaffirming side of things. That tendency to change the environment and the culture can make such a massive difference to how your child learns and thrives and grows. So we want to keep bringing that into conversation, or bringing that into your perspective whenever you're working on any kind of barriers with your child. So jumping back into the world of the child, talked about executive functioning. We also want to look at understanding sensory processing. A lot of autistic, I'd say children, but autistic people in general, have a lot of sensitivities to sound and taste and touch and smell, and even the clothing that they're wearing. So that's got to be part of that curiosity of going, maybe some of the reactions that they're having is because something's too loud, or maybe they're hearing something that I can't hear because they're so hyper tuned into the sounds around them. Maybe they can feel something that I can't feel, because a lot of autistic children are very sensitive to energy, emotional energy, electrical energy. There can be lights that make sounds that we can't hear. There can be certain feelings that they get from people, certain energies that they may find difficult to read. They can have difficulty understanding or recognizing their own emotions. So there's something called alexithymia, which is a difficulty in recognizing or labeling their own emotions. And so they could be feeling, because really when you think about emotions, they're just sensations in the body. And we've become familiar with those sensations and know, oh, that sensation is anger, or that sensation is sadness, or that sensation is anxiety. But if a child is having difficulty in feeling those emotions, then, it could creep up on them. Like, we sometimes recognize that we're stacking until we crack. Sometimes we go from 0 to 100 in a nanosecond, but sometimes we can recognize that where there's a bit of momentum, we can feel us getting more and more agitated. But sometimes for some autistic kids, they're not able to recognize those emotions, or they're not feeling them creep up, or they're not knowing what that is. It just feels like this uncomfortable sensation. And then all of a sudden the sensation becomes so overwhelming, they don't know what to do about it. So sometimes what can seem like, even, and we'll do an episode on meltdowns and shutdowns and tantrums, what can seem like it starts off as a tantrum, which is trying to get your own way, can end up in a meltdown where they actually trigger themselves into emotional meltdown and struggle to deal with the intensity of that emotion. So it can be that it almost becomes a sort of a panic, that they are feeling this sense of emotion and they don't know what to do about it. And then, of course, the body's going to go into survival mode and do whatever it has to do in order to try and stay safe and to get back to its equilibrium. So it's trying to get into that, that survival state. And so you might see, behaviors that you might consider to be immoral or aggressive or, inappropriate, because the logical part of the brain is not online at that point anyway, even if they did know, right from wrong. So that's all of us as well, that when we're in that survival mode, that logic and reasoning goes out the window, right? So it's recognizing what could be going on for your child in that emotional perspective, that sensory perspective, as well as the executive functioning side of things. And then we have the social element. So when we're looking at things socially, they have a different way of socializing, and they used to think that, and this is this double empathy where it's a two-way street. It's that, people often say that autistic people can't communicate or can't socialize the way that neurotypicals can. But in a room of autistic people, they get each other, they understand each other a lot of the time. And so is it that autistic people can't communicate with neurotypicals, or is it that neurotypicals can't communicate with autistic people? That there is a two-way street going on here. So it's understanding how an autistic person communicates and how they're thinking, and a lot of the time you are getting very upfront, honest answers. They've often find it very difficult to lie about things. And again, it's a spectrum, so it's going to be different for every child. But they may be seeing life differently. They may be seeing love differently. They may be seeing relationships differently, friendships differently. The need that you have for your child to have friendships in a certain way may not be the need that they have. So again, we're coming back to that self-awareness thing and going, what preconceived notions do I have that I'm projecting onto my child that just don't fit my child? It's really getting to know what they want and how they can get to that. Do they want more than one friend? Do they want friends at all? Are they happy enough having an online friend community and just their family that they interact with? Is that enough for them? I remember a interview that a podcast that I watched. This is again Tanner's mum and Lise, Connor's mum from Love on the Spectrum. They were interviewing Tanner and Connor. And Connor was saying that, at lunchtimes he would go and read by himself, and his siblings would come along and feel really bad for him that he wasn't playing with any friends. And he was like, no, I loved it, because there was so much going on in the classroom that was my time to just be by myself and have everybody just leave me alone. So often we project what we think is right socially onto our child, and it's not what they want, but in saying that as well, I'm very well aware that there are a lot of kids that do want that connection and do want that communication and really struggle to understand what's going on, because humans are really complicated and they don't always say what they mean. And there's often these unspoken cues and these unspoken rules that come from body language or facial expressions. And sometimes that can be really difficult for an autistic person to process all of that so quickly to understand what's going on. So they need support in being able to dissect what all of those things mean. It doesn't mean that they can't learn those things. It's probably, or it may not, I won't say probably, it's too absolute. It may not come easy, or it may not come naturally like other brains may pick it up and learn and develop. It might need to be specifically pointed out that this is how the weird neurotypical people think and respond, right? Because there are a lot of really strange kind of rituals that, us neurotypicals kind of get involved in, that are unspoken, unwritten rules that are very confusing. And we even see that around different cultures. So we almost have to see autism as a different culture. We might go to certain cultures, for example, that if you look someone in the eye in certain cultures, I think this is part of our Aboriginal culture in Australia, that if an Aboriginal is look another Aboriginal or an elder in the eye, and correct me if I'm wrong here, like chuck it in the comments, but I know it's definitely in some cultures, if you look an elderly person in the eye or someone older than you in the eye, it's a sign of disrespect. But in a Western culture, that's often a sign of respect, is to look someone in the eyes. But we also know that in the autism world, a lot of the times that is incredibly painful or uncomfortable for someone to look at someone in the eyes, and they're often forced to. I've even known of professionals, like psychological professionals, who have literally said to an autistic person, you need to start looking at people in the eye. And I just kind of cringe and go, why? Like, that's your culture. That's not necessarily their culture or something that sits well with them. So we don't need to be doing anything. There's no right path. There's no wrong path. We want to get along. We want to understand each other and how we can get along. So social situations can be really challenging. Theory of mind is an element of the brain where we're able to jump into the world of somebody else and think about what that must feel like for them, or what that they might be thinking. And if you think about your conversations, how often are you listening to someone and anticipating what they're going to say next based on what they've just said, what you know about them, all of the information from their body language that has been put together to help you to make sense of what they're saying and what they're likely to say next. So that kind of theory of mind, and what they're feeling as they're saying, like you get it picking up those cues. Again, a lot of processing's going on in that whole conversation that can be absolutely exhausting for an autistic person. No wonder why they want to sit by themselves, because there's so much involved in that. And as an introvert myself, who doesn't look like an introvert, because I could go out there and talk and talk and talk and be with people, but then I'm exhausted. I'm ready to just not talk to anyone for the rest of the day. And thankfully, my husband's the same. So we can go into our separate corners and not talk for hours, because we need to recharge the batteries. So imagine, anytime, and you might relate to this, that sometimes you might have just had this exhausting day and your battery is drained and you need some space. So know that that can be happening for your child, where you're seeing them interact with people and then needing that space, that it may not be that they don't want to interact with people. It's just that they need some scaffolding or some breaks added in there, which is often why schools need to add in breaks for their children as well, so that they can recharge their batteries and it doesn't all stack up, that everything's so overwhelming, because it's not always easy. So theory of mind is jumping into the world of the other person. Central coherence is the other side of things, where we tend to take like little pieces of information and be able to put it into kind of a big picture and have a look at like the context of, I might be having a conversation about, my chickens, for example, love my chickens. And we're not necessarily putting it into the bigger context, or when we're looking at things, you're understanding the bigger context of maybe where the chickens live, or, other things that I've said about it, and piecing together what I'm currently saying in the context of what I've said before and what it means. And so this is where our central coherence is about looking at that big picture. So if somebody's talking about a concept, what does that concept mean in the bigger frame of mind or the bigger picture? So a lot of the times, or sometimes in an autistic brain, they can be so focused on a particular thing that's being said that they're not necessarily putting it into the context of that bigger picture. And that's why sometimes reading comprehension can be so difficult, because we're looking at the sentence and not looking at what that sentence means in the context of the story. So you can imagine how difficult that would then also be in a social situation, to be trying to process the information that's in front of you, but then draw meaning from that in the context of what is the person meaning about their life, or what are they referencing in, like, it. So it can be very complicated, when you start to break down the social side of things. And I remember when I was writing this in the program and just kind of going, oh my gosh, social interactions are so complex. And looking at understanding what people are saying and how they're saying it is a really progressive thing that we're continually going to be needing to have conversations with your kids to understand what was happening in this situation, what was happening in that situation, to kind of break it down. And this is where OTs specifically, and speech pathologists too, I think, are really valuable in helping with those social skills to really, find those kind of nuances in that social interactions, and teach your child what's going on when they're, interacting with someone. And so, social differences is another understanding that we need to have. Looking at the special interest, this is where your strengths for your child can often lie, and you can use those strengths in order to scaffold other things. So we're really wanting to see, what can they do? What do they have challenges with? And how can we bridge that gap between where they are and where they want to be? So in this episode, my intention is to just start off getting a sense of how do all these things, do any of these things, or do some of these things fit for your child? How curious can you be? Like, can you jump into the world of your child and really make sense of what's going on for them? And looking at it from that neuroaffirming perspective, where we're really trying to look at their neurotype, their individual neurotype. What are their strengths? What are their preferences? How do we get to know this unique child, this unique individual, and help them to see their uniqueness, help them to see the joy that they bring into the world? This actually goes for all children, that we are needing to honor who they are as a person. The difference between an autistic child and a neurotypical child is only that the neurotypical child will grow up in a neurotypical environment and think that that's normal. And what we're needing to do is, and so even though a neurotypical child can still grow up with self-worth issues, it's still going to have a lot to do with the awareness of the parent. It's going to have a lot to do with their environment, the relationships that they have, how they're scaffolded when they go through those challenging situations, how much they're understood and heard and supported. All children are going to experience that, and that's going to depend, how they experience that is going to directly relate to how they then feel about themselves and their sense of identity. When you're raising an autistic child, there's just that other element that they will grow up in sadly at the moment, a neurotypical environment. And there is a lot of change happening, and change just takes time. Like I said at the beginning, that, the brain doesn't like change. And as a society, it takes a little bit longer for change to happen. If you look at, women's liberation as an example, some people went through the trenches, the hard yards, before a lot of change happens to be where we're at right now. And we're still making headway in that department as well. So we're needing to see that your child is a trailblazer. Your child is pushing the norms and helping society to be more flexible, even though sometimes I'm sure you experience the inflexibility and biases and prejudices and discrimination. And throughout all of that, your child's sense of identity, their sense of worthiness is going to be the thing, and the relationships that they have is going to be a buffer for them. So the self-awareness that you have to recognize your own biases, to be self-aware, to keep working on that narrative, which we all need to do, and to continually be in that mindset of living, learning, sharing, growing, evolving. and recognizing that there is no right path, that your child is in this world to be uniquely them, to share with the world who they are, how they live, to help the world to learn and grow because they are in it. And we want to be giving them that message. We want to help them see that challenges are things that we can work around and overcome, and that you're in it together, because that is going to be what builds them to be able to be as resilient as possible through those challenges. And I get that as I'm saying this, there are so many different situations on this spectrum that we could be applying this information to, and that I will not have articulated the sensitivity that I needed to for certain situations, because it needed to be said in a different way. So if you have felt that way, I do apologize, because it's so difficult to take this spectrum and give specific examples that fit everybody, because I get that people are experiencing different levels of severity of barriers and challenges, and different situations that add to that are coming from external environments. So all I can say is please keep watching the show, because we will keep expanding and growing on what we say, and we'll bring people in. And like I said, I'm super excited to be able to speak to Tanner's mum in a couple of weeks. And I'm really glad that you're here. We're here to support you. If you are interested in learning more of what I teach and how I teach in terms of mindset, in terms of supporting a child, being neuroaffirming, and just helping your child develop that really strong sense of identity, please have a look at our website, go to our autism program and see if it's the right fit for you. But thanks for listening, guys. Really kind of take away from that, get that curious mindset, jump into the world of your child. What must they be thinking to be feeling the way that they are? Where are they at in their brain development for them to be feeling the way that they are and to be behaving the way that they are or experiencing the challenges that they are? Keep getting curious, keep asking those questions, and be very mindful of your narrative that wants to go into those stressful thinking lenses. Very often parents feel overwhelmed by the challenges of parenting an autistic child. And if this is you, the Parental Stress Centre's 9-week Autism Parental Stress Relief Program is here to help. You'll learn practical strategies to reduce stress, how to change how you think about those different challenges, and how to support your child, all while being part of a community of people that gets you. And the best part is you get lifetime access to these resources. So head on over to Parental Stress Centre today to find out more.